All right, welcome back. We're going to begin to look at the establishment of colonial settlements here in primarily North America over the course of the next several lectures here, focusing on the eastern seaboard of what would become the United States, the collection of varied colonies, but where England in particular would get its establish itself in the New World. So we'll take a look at that process, and this will kind of will oscillate between what's happening in the New World, the types of settlements, and the organization of those settlements. But then how that correlates with what is happening primarily in England at the same time. That will be essentially how we're going to handle looking at New World colonization in North America. After that, we'll begin to get into what colonial life was like, kind of begin a brief examination of that type of rugged lifestyle that was being established, the essentially carving out of settled life in a really, in the eyes of Europeans, a virgin wilderness, and then also talk about the manifestation of identity, what the origins of American identity begin to anchor themselves in the New World. How quickly this happens, where the sources of that identity lie, and there are numerous ones. So we'll take a look at all of them as we begin to kind of understand this new emergence of a new kind of major, what would become a major player in world history. After that, we'll also look at what is happening in the continent, primarily in France, the new continental power emerging as a result of the 30 Years' War that we discussed previous to the our first exam. And also then we'll begin to move steadily eastward across the Eurasian continent, looking at Ivan the Great, his accomplishments, and then also what's happening in colonial India with the consolidation of British rule, and then also what was beginning to happen in Asia, the Far East as well. So that gives us kind of a rough idea of the agenda that we're going to kind of pursue here. It should also be noted that I realize that the chapters of the textbook are not syncing with lectures. That is to say, the lectures are here. The timeline that we're talking about in these lectures is behind that of the chapters that are assigned. So really the lectures are designed to provide a greater, kind of more granular, more detailed look at historical material. So I'm going to try and get them back in line as quickly as possible. That probably won't happen for this week, but you'll be able to keep up with the readings, which will get you up through the American and French revolutions primarily. But by the end of this week's lectures, as far as the lecture material is concerned, we're going to be pivoting into the early to mid 18th century. So we'll just be, roughly maybe a quarter century, hopefully, maybe a half century behind the readings that you're maintaining in the textbook. That all said, let's proceed here. Looking at this early colonization and settlement process that's beginning to, or would begin to take place under the reign of Elizabeth I, who we covered from last lecture, and the types of settlement that the English would try to create for themselves. That would start with a formal kind of government-backed effort to establish colonies. That was probably as a result of following in the footsteps of Spain, who was by the mid to late 16th century well established in the New World, the dominant power, European power in the New World, in Central and South America. Uh, but it was the it was clear that England, France, the Netherlands, um, just to name three other European powers, were going to have to begin very rapidly to make up ground in carving out colonies and establishing colonies around the world. One of those places would be in North America. For Elizabeth, during her tenure, she would oversee the establishment of the Roanoke colony in what is today North Carolina. That would be end in failure after a very short 3-year run. And then after that, as a result of what was happening in England, there would be other colonies established. The first successful one, of course, was Jamestown in 1607. But this was unique in that it was a private venture that was backed by private interests, investors looking to make a profit with the establishment of a new colony and setting up a colonial company, essentially, that would find a product, a cash crop, and then use that to make a profit and essentially get payouts on their investment as a result. It's important also to notice or to keep in mind that in England, religious strife between Protestants and Catholics was in full effect. This would not only be the case really for the 16th century, but it would also feed well into the 17th century. That would be running from really essentially the moment that King Henry VIII decided to make England a Protestant country, form the Anglican Church, which the sovereign of England would serve as the head of both state and church, and then this left this legacy basically of these shifts between Protestant and Catholic sovereigns that would play themselves out eventually, even by the early to mid 17th century, leading to civil war, which we'll discuss. So all of this is kind of churning here to help us try and understand the dynamics of what was going on, and this is just within England. So it's important to understand. Picking up from last time, you'll recall that Elizabeth I was playing this very kind of cat and mouse game as far as politics was concerned within the balance of power in Europe itself. One of the flashpoints, the flashpoint perhaps in her reign, was that of thwarting the invasion efforts of the Spanish Armada in 1588. Again, that marks the high water mark of Spanish dominance as far as an imperial power is concerned. From that moment on, really, Spain is going to be an empire in decline and begin to be eclipsed by other powers such as England. Roanoke was authorized by Queen Elizabeth in, not coincidentally, in 1587. She's going to provide public funds for Sir Walter Raleigh to lead an expedition and settle in what again is today North Carolina, the coastline. Um, this had a brief few-year run of success, but in 1590 the settlement mysteriously disappeared, which remains largely a mystery to this day. There are some pretty solid theories as to exactly what might have transpired. They did find bodies that had been buried, but they had been buried in kind of haphazard fashion, denoting some sort of crisis, or that there was some sort of immediacy to you know burying the dead and moving on, or that there wasn't the due process or course of you know proper burial that was taking place. Nonetheless, with this failure that occurred, English merchants quickly began to lead privatized efforts to colonize the New World. The English crown was preoccupied with other matters, and so but at the same time, English merchants realized that there was true wealth that lay in establishing colonies. So wealthy English nobles pooled their money, their resources, into private companies that looked to control colonial settlement via what are called charters. Two examples: two companies came to dominate the market, so to speak. That was the Virginia Company of London, which held claims to roughly the Mid-Atlantic region, roughly what is today the Mid-Atlantic region of North America, and the Virginia Company of Plymouth, which held claims to the Mid-Atlantic in the New England, what is today the New England area of the eastern seaboard. Again, in 1607, we have the successful establishment, the permanent settlement of Jamestown by the Virginia Company of London. It was led by Captain John Smith, who, with John Rolfe in 1610, discovered a very profitable, very lucrative cash crop tobacco that flourished in the clay-like soils of basically what is today southern Virginia. So that was kind of the commercial success that England needed in order to feel comfortable with sustaining colonization in the New World, in the Western Hemisphere. This was fueled by also religious kind of animosities that kept flaring up, as mentioned, between Protestants and Catholics in England as well. Again, the English Reformation upset many. When Henry VIII took the country out from being a Catholic bastion, this upset, obviously, English Catholics, who thought that Henry VIII had gone too far. English Protestants thought he had not gone far enough. And so his long-term successor, that being after a few brief previous monarchical reigns, you have his daughter Elizabeth I, governing for some 40 plus years. Remember, she is a virgin queen, so she has no heirs to carry on her dynasty or her specific lineage. She was raised Protestant. She was, again, kind of playing this balance of power game between Protestants and Catholics, try and with the Anglican Church identity in the balance. When she dies in 1603, the monarchy reverts back to King James the First, who is going to become the next to occupy the throne. He is the son of Mary, Queen of Scots, who was Bloody Mary, Mary, Queen of Scots, who was executed by Elizabeth. So King James was raised Catholic, and so now we have the transition. The pendulum swings back towards the authority of Catholic influence, which is not only a political entity as being the King of England, but also is the head of the church, the Anglican Church. And so he's going to want to impose or reimpose Catholic influences within the Anglican Church as well. In order to try early, within essentially the first year of his reign, by 1604, he's going to try and appease both Catholics and Protestants in a very kind of general gesture. This is when he authorizes the translation of the Bible into a new version, which placed English nationalism at the center of biblical interpretation. This essentially makes the English people God's elect, a chosen people, and that England was a chosen land in the eyes of God. And so this became known as the King James Version of the Bible. And so what he's trying to do here is he's trying to play up English identity, regardless of whether it's Protestant or Catholic, and really play to the citizens' notions of national identity rather than religious identity. And so this is the type of acrobatics that sovereigns would have to go through in order to try and keep their religious factions over which they governed happy to the best of their ability. In their consistent and persistent effort to cleanse the Church of corruption, Puritans and Scottish Calvinists, that is to say, those two groups being Protestant sects, wanted to shift authority of the Church from bishops and kind of hierarchical kind of forms of leadership to more local control through local congregations and the church elders that would kind of govern the communities, the religious communities. These were known as presbyters. They would be elected from the congregation for set terms of office, and these elections could be used to demonstrate equality among all Christians. That would do away again with these kind of ranks of hierarchy. This is significant on the part of the Puritans and these Scottish Calvinists, because it would hopefully, in their eyes, minimize the potential for corruption, church corruption. um, which is one of the reasons for fueling the Protestant Reformation um, in general. With this kind of new organization or approach to organizing um, church authority and decentralizing it to a very local level, this helped to basically define the origins of what is known as Presbyterianism. This is a religious structure that was transplanted and would be transplanted to places like New England in the New World. It would also bring them into conflict with the likes of King James, who was interested in consolidating control in the hands of the church hierarchy. And so this placed communities like the Puritans in particular at odds with the king and with the Anglican Church. When that began to be clear, that break, this is really the moment when the Puritans realized that it might be in their best interests to physically relocate themselves. And indeed they did so. They would initially move across to the Netherlands, where there was also a large sympathetic Protestant Puritan community, but there was a poor economy, and as a result, there were few economic opportunities. So a portion of the Puritans that had migrated from England to the Netherlands, decided in 1620, relocate themselves to the New World to basically get a charter from one of these companies, agree to the terms located therein, and set up their own religious-oriented community in the New World. Again, the idea that they would enjoy a larger degree of religious freedom. From September to December of 1620, they sailed on the Mayflower with others from the Virginia-London Company. There were roughly about 30 pilgrims in total. The ship was blown off course, originally aiming for Virginia, trying to get as close to Jamestown as possible. They instead landed in New England. So their charter did not really apply to the geographic area in which they found themselves, but they essentially carved out an existence for themselves and settled virtually on the spot in what is today Massachusetts. Before disembarking, however, the Pilgrims drafted what was known as the Mayflower Compact. This established a form of government where officials could be elected, but only if they were members of the church, of the Puritan Church. Only they could vote. So what's interesting here is that the Mayflower Compact, which is often seen as the source document, you might say, for kind of more democratic principles, rule by the people, essentially, was in fact rather restrictive in its terms, or constrictive in its terms, as far as who would be eligible to vote and who would hold the kind of political authority. So more than kind of establishing an element of democracy, again with a little d, this was more really an effort to ensure pilgrims and reinforce the control that the pilgrims had, and also to boost their membership in the church. And within the congregation itself, so that basically if you wanted to become a voting member of the community, of the colony, then you would have to join the church in order to do so, become one of the pilgrims, a Puritan. William Bradford served as the first governor. He founded the Plymouth Plantation, and the Puritans worked with local native populations. This is where you get the origins of Thanksgiving, trying to see them through a very tenuous first few years of settlement. It was a dismal first winter indeed. There was starvation that occurred, as in other places like Jamestown. So the people were not well prepared to handle the harshness of the climate. But afterward, the Pilgrims did manage to prosper, and towards the end of the 17th century, in 1691, they merged with a second migration of Puritans who established themselves in what's called the Massachusetts Bay Colony. And that's where we're going to pick up with the second part here of our talk. So stay tuned.